Welcome. This is a lecture series. Please have paper and pencils ready to take notes. Please be ready to pause the video whenever I ask you to do so. It is very important that you take good notes during the introduction of this standard so that you can use them during assignments and assessments later. Let's get started. This is the Oklahoma Standard 8.3.R.2, 8th grade, 3rd standard, reading, point 2. The language of the standard reads, students will evaluate points of view and perspectives and describe how this affects grade level literary and/or informational text. Please pause the video and write down this standard. Let's start with the general overview of point of view. Point of view is how the story is told, the angle or the vision or the position from which the events are narrated for the reader. We're going to break down the different types of points of view. Please pause this video and write down the definition. You do not have to write down the bulleted points, but I encourage you to do so. The more notes you take, the more it will jog your memory later. Let's first discuss first person. Whenever the author is using first person, they will say I or we. Sometimes it's used when a person is stating an opinion or sharing a feeling. I have an example here in yellow. I love my new car so much I am jumping for joy. That is written in the first person. Please pause the screen and write down the definition for first person. Again, you do not have to write down the examples in yellow, but I encourage you to do so. Now let's look at second person. Second person will use the word you. It is basically used whenever giving directions or anytime you're speaking directly to someone. It's almost never used to tell a story. See my example here in yellow? This is sort of like a recipe. To make lemonade, you add lemon juice, water, and sugar. This is told in the second person. Please pause the video and take notes on this screen. Now let's talk about third person. Whenever the author is writing in a third person point of view, they use the words he, she, or they. Sometimes they'll use the word it whenever they're talking about a thing instead of a person. See my example here? Jane rode home as fast as she could. Then she jumped off her bike and ran into the house to see what was going on. This is an example of third person. Please pause the video and take notes on what the definition is of third person point of view. We have another third person point of view, third person limited. This is where the narrator is a non-participant, and the narrator's knowledge of the situation is kind of limited to just one character. So look at the example here. Steve felt like he had done something good for the school. He felt like a helper and wanted to do more good things to assist the other students. But how did everybody else feel? How did Addie and Blake feel about their work? He would have to talk to them to find out. Notice that the author is writing only from the point of view of Steve. Steve does not know how Addie or Blake feels, and neither does the narrator. The narrator is not participating. They're only giving you the point of view, limited, third person. Please pause the video and write down the definition of third person limited. Now let's consider third person omniscient. The writer is a non-participant, but they can see everything that's going on. They have unlimited knowledge about everybody that is in the story. From this angle, they can go anywhere in the story, they can see anything, they can comment on anything. Notice the example we're using here that the author is writing for third person omniscient. Steve felt like he had done something good for the school. He felt like a helper and wanted to do more good things to assist the other students. But how did everybody else feel? How did Addie and Blake feel about their work? He would have to talk to them to find out. Steve wouldn't know until he talked to them, but Addie and Blake felt the exact same way. Addie was so excited about doing more for the school, She was sure they could make a difference at the school. Blake was already planning new ways to raise money and awareness to get more people involved. Notice how the author switched between Steve, Addie, and Blake. It was as if they knew everything that was going on in the story and in their minds. Please pause this video and write down the definition of third-person omniscient. Now that we've talked of point of view, let's talk about perspective. Perspective is how a person views events, people, or ideas, and they can be influenced by many things. Your perspective on a mall may be different than the perspective of somebody who lives in a third world country. It depends on where you live, what experiences you've had, and what your culture is as to your perspective to events, peoples, and ideas. Please pause the video and write down the definition of perspective. Now let's see how we identify the narrative perspective. First, we're going to focus on the narrator. Who is telling the story? Don't look at the characters or setting. Let's only look at the narrator's voice because that is what matters. Pause the video and write down identifying narrative perspective and the definition. Here are some clues to identifying the point of view. If they're saying first person, second person, or third person, I have already given you these examples in the previous screens. I've just put it into a table for quick identification. Please pause the video and write down this table so that you can use it for quick identification later in identifying the point of view for your story. Let's look at a few helpful hints here. First, check to see if it is first or second person. Second, check to see if it's objective, limited, or omniscient. Then you can ask yourself, whose story is the narrator telling? His, mine, or someone else's? To determine the point of view, you need to focus on the narration, not on the dialogue. Let's return to the main standard and read it again. So our standard stated that we would look at points of view and perspectives and describe how this affects grade level literary or informational text. So once you have determined the point of view and the perspective that it's being told from, then you're going to be able to describe how that point of view affects the text. For example, if a story is told through the view of, say, a teacher versus a student, don't you imagine that the points of view and perspectives will change how the story is told? That is an example of how you would describe how the points of view and perspectives would change the story. Thank you very much for joining me today. Keep your notes handy, practice these skills with assignments, and then take an assessment to ensure that you have mastery of this skill.